Good morning and welcome to the Pittsburgh Current podcast. I am Pittsburgh Current editor and publisher Charlie Deitch. Back with you as always on Thursday. We have issue 5 out on the streets this week, and it is our hockey issue, our Pens. We call it our hockey issue, but it's really our Pens preview. I wanted to get down and do some wheeling hockey, but we're just we're new, we're startup, so we don't have the wheeling budget yet, so we're still working on things like that. Our guest today will be Brian Metzer, the Pittsburgh Current hockey writer and also a host of Pens Radio. Sorry, I didn't want to mess that up, and I wrote it down, and then I didn't have it up, so I messed it up anyway. Host of the Penguins Radio host on the Penguins Radio Network.
One of the many hosts.
One of the many hosts, Brian Metzer, which he was talking about that a little bit, so we don't have to get into that. But a couple things first I want to talk about this week. We're very excited this week. Since we've started the Pittsburgh Current, one of our goals was to really make an outreach into the arts community and bring coverage of the arts back to the level that it deserves. And we're very proud very proud to announce that the Pittsburgh Current is the official media partner of the Art Noir Guide to Pittsburgh for the upcoming Pittsburgh International. We're working with the Andy Warhol Museum and the August Wilson Center, and I can't tell you how humbled and honored we are to be a part of that. It's the Carnegie International is a major event, and there will be, it's 6 months long, and the arts, aside from the international, there will also be so much to see from local artists and local galleries that, and this guide will sort of be a way to kind of see everything that's coming and make sure that you get the most out of this time around the Carnegie International. So we're really excited about that, and we want to thank the folks at Art Noir, the August Wilson Center, and the Andy Warhol Museum for working with us on that and for making us their media partner. It's like I said, it's quite an honor. So we really do appreciate that. Now, probably the opposite of arts, although hockey, I think, is one of the more artistic sports next to figure skating. And I don't mean that that sounds like an insult, Brian. I didn't mean that. Brian Metzer is here, of the Pittsburgh Current's hockey writer. I mean, there's just, I've always felt like that hockey is one of the, hockey has the toughest athletes, in my opinion, than most any other sport. But it's also, in a way, except for the fights that break out, it's also, in a way, I think, a very gentlemanly sport, in a way. And I don't know why I think that.
I think it's sort of like, and it's funny when you think of like a mosh pit.
Yeah.
And you get knocked down.
Yeah.
Somebody helps you up.
Right, exactly.
That's sort of how it is in
exactly.
hockey. I mean, that's sort of what
that's
I like
true.
So I mean, you're right, though. I think it is a gentlemanly sport. There's a brotherhood of the players.
Yeah.
And it can be a very artistic sport. I mean, you look at a pretty goal like the Penguins scored in the preseason game last night, where it's just tic-tac-toe passes on the power play, and Derek Brassard scored. It was a thing of beauty. But at the same time, like you said, someone drops the mitts, and it gets a little bit physical.
Yeah.
And there are ugly incidents. Robert Bortuzzo, a former Penguin, just elbowed Michael Kempney of the Washington Capitals the other night, and he's going to get a suspension for this, and the kid was knocked out and all this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that ugliness is there,
right.
but generally those players seem to have a decent level of respect for one another,
Yes.
and I think because they all appreciate the hard work that went into getting where they are.
Right, and I think that's the other thing that's always impressed me about, and of course there are travel teams in baseball and softball, and there's football from the time a kid is little, and even wrestling from the time a kid is like 8 years old. But it's really, if you're going to make it to the NHL, it's really a commitment. I mean, a lot of these kids leave home, give up a lot of their life at home to go out and to play on AAU teams and to play on teams that can get them, either a college scholarship that will lead to the NHL or a ticket to the NHL. And I always thought that the commitment that goes into becoming a professional hockey player also, I think, is probably nearly unmatched.
Well, it's interesting to your point is that it's a family commitment too,
Yeah.
because mom and dad, they're usually getting up at 5 a.m. or whatever to take their child to practice, because the ice time, I mean, I know it's a lot more common now, a lot more rinks available and things, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
And that's not the case in every city. So if you want to really do this, your parents are putting in that level of commitment. You're doing it before school. You're doing it after school. It's all these different just crazy things that you've got to give up, like you said. You don't have free time, and you don't have time with your friends. I mean, that becomes your job in a way at a very, very early age. And now with leagues in the United States, like the USHL, that's really grown, and it's almost a competitor with Canadian junior hockey. So where kids used to have to move to Canada, they now can at least move to a market in the States and play for that league. And what's kind of cool is that you're not always just stuck pinning your hopes on the NHL. If it doesn't work out, the USHL does a tremendous job of placing kids in college and making sure that they can either get into a team or just, if nothing else, earn themselves a scholarship so they have an education for life after the game if they're not maybe at the level of making it to the National Hockey League.
And I worked in a city where there was a USHL team, and that was probably some of their prouder accomplishments. When they got a kid to college or when they got a kid into a school, into a great hockey program or into a great school with a decent hockey program. I mean, that's what they were most proud of. But I remember seeing these like 17-year-old kids who would leave home and then they would, I can't remember if they would, basically stay with someone else who was some of them now they're guardians and so forth just to play hockey. And that's a huge commitment. And I think that's always something that I've, it's always been sort of the thing that I like most about hockey, I think, is that the athletes really it's a different level of commitment.
It really is. And I think, to go back to what we talked about at the beginning, that's partly why they have respect for their game. Yeah. And I think that they know what went into getting them there. Yeah. And it wasn't an easy thing. And also, I mean, a lot of high schools don't provide them with the equipment. Right. I mean, in some sports, you get everything. Like if you're going to play, the school district provides that. Yeah. For hockey, I mean, you put in thousands of dollars for the equipment. Skates alone sometimes can be $500-$600 a pair for a very nice pair of skates. Sticks are so expensive now. So people are devoting all this money to it, and they know their parents gave up things to make that a reality for them, and they seem to appreciate that. And I think just in dealing with National Hockey League players, and even players at lower levels, and the draft picks are some of the most respectful young men I've ever come across because of that. And I think they know what went into it. And there's only been one or two guys that I've ever come across in the league and dealing with it from a media capacity that have not been my favorites. Other than that, I mean, everybody's super cool. They deal with the same dumb question day after day, and they'll give you a thoughtful answer. I mean, think of someone like Sidney Crosby here in Pittsburgh. He meets with the media 2 and 3 times a day sometimes. Sure. And he's never rude. He might get a little short or something if he's angry about something, but he's never rude. He gives you a thoughtful answer. And sometimes people don't like that. They're like, he's too vanilla. He's not. He gives you a thoughtful answer. He looks you in the eye. And that's the one thing that I think is so cool. This guy's the greatest player on the planet. And you ask him a question, he's looking at you. He gives you eye contact. He makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. And when you're that level and you have that level of respect for everyone around you and what it takes to be what he is, I think that's pretty commendable. Yeah.
I mean, he's a perfect example. I mean, he came to the city. He lived with Mario Lemieux for I don't know the exact, but it was quite a length of time that he lived with Mario Lemieux because he was literally Sid the Kid when he came here. And so that just shows. And again, that's how you become the best in the world at something, is by just putting the time and the effort and just making those commitments is what allows you to hit. If you want to know how to hit that level, it's not a secret. Not a lot of people can do it or want to do it, but that's how you do it. Is you just dedicate every single thing to.
Yeah, you put every ounce of yourself into it. I mean, and another example would be when you talk about billet families and things. I mean, Evgeny Malkin, when he came, the Penguins had Sergei Gonchar, and he stayed with Sergei, and he was able to live a Russian life here in Pittsburgh with somebody that was a countryman and made him comfortable. And teams do that, though. They try and find those areas of comfort for a player. And this is anywhere around the league. In junior hockey, they'll try and find maybe a Russian family or whatever. And I can take it all the way back. I went to high school with a guy that his family spoke Czech in the home. Mm-hmm. And, well, it was his uncle, actually. But they were the billet family for Jaromir Jagr when he came. Wow. And he lived with them for his first handful of years in the league. And I remember the guy I went to high school with, we were playing Nintendo with Yags last night and doing all of this. I mean, but it was he had this very comfortable setting right here in Pittsburgh. Yeah. It was in the South Hills or whatever, and it all worked out perfect for him. And that's what teams do to help foster the comfort level in a new city. And it's kind of cool to see that too.
Now yourself, were you? I mean, when I started out in this business, I wanted to be a sports writer. I wanted to cover sports. I didn't really have a preference on what I covered or whatever. So were you a hockey fan before you became a hockey writer and hockey reporter, or did one sort of follow the other, I guess?
For me, I probably didn't know I was going to be covering the Penguins whenever I became a hockey fan,
Right.
because I became a hockey fan at 8 or 9 years old.
Sure.
And that was due in large part to my dad being a big hockey fan.
Yeah.
He used to play, after he passed away, I found a really cool picture of him with a buddy up on a frozen lake in Highland Park.
Wow.
With like gloves and sticks, and they're like set up for a face-off. It was like one of the coolest things I'd ever found. But my dad was into hockey, so he got me into hockey. And then, of course, we had the best salesman for hockey on the planet, Mario Lemieux, arriving in Pittsburgh right around that time.
Sure.
Because I want to say I went to my first game in 1983. So that would have been right before Mario, and then the 84. And I don't really remember that game as much. I know it was against the Chicago Blackhawks, but then the next year Mario was here. And, I mean, this guy was just magic.
Yeah.
I mean, he could do anything on the ice, and still to this day, I mean, I've been around Mario. I've never really had the chance to meet him.
Yeah.
I've been on elevators with him. I've worked essentially for his company now for a number of years, and he's one guy I get tongue-tied around, and I'm sure already people listening or watching here might say, well, Matt, you never get tongue-tied. You talk way too much. Right. Not if Mario's standing there. This guy is larger than life, and I've always felt that way about him.
Yeah.
And he's just such a humanitarian. Look at what he did after, just kept you in love with like him and his product and what he's done for hockey. So that's been kind of a cool thing. So I followed it all the way up through my formative years. They won those cups in the early 90s. That was something that was this culmination of being a fan at that point for me for already like 10 years or so. And then after the lockout in 2005, right before Sidney Crosby got here, it was 04 when that happened, and into the 05 season when Sid was going to actually make his appearance in Pittsburgh. I just, at that point, thought, okay, now's my chance. I can get into this, because I always was interested in doing that. And I worked in business and did all these other kind of things. And I worked for a nonprofit in Sharpsburg at the time. I still do. And I saw an opening. And so I started doing some blogging, and I started making some contacts, and I was always interested in it. I always was doing writing, and I wanted to get into radio stuff. So it's kind of cool that after that, sadly, a lot of people lost jobs, but it produced some openings, and then the new media trend started and all of this. And I started doing work for XM Radio. And that was one of my first forays into the business. And I was covering games on a credential for them. I did some writing for HockeyBuzz.com, which is still around now, and Eklund over there, who was the anonymous hockey blogger and all this kind of thing. But I was doing radio hits for XM, and next thing you know, meeting people in Pittsburgh. I started writing for the Beaver County Times, Versus.com, which is the predecessor to the NBC Sports Network now.
Sure.
So I was just sort of freelancing a lot of different places, and just blowing doors open and meeting people, and sort of expanding the footprint. And all the way to the to today, where we have we got to get this on.
The Pittsburgh current hockey issue, which we will start finally talking about. But
we can't leave that out.
Yeah, right? No, we'll talk about it. But the one thing I want to ask you is, because you said this earlier, and I wanted to. You meant, and a lot of people have said it. I've said it. A lot of people have said it, that Sidney Crosby is the best hockey player playing today. Now, there are people obviously that would say that that's arguably true, but you said it with such emphasis. Do you? What is there a debate in your mind on whether or not Sidney Crosby is the greatest hockey player playing right now?
You can make the case that, because everybody around the league is going to say, well, Connor McDavid.
Yeah.
And now Connor is an outstanding talent. I mean, he scores points like crazy. I mean, he can score goals. He can pass like a magician. I mean, he does everything well. And the thing that really people love with him is the speed with which he plays the game.
Yeah.
And he's big. He's bigger than Sid. I mean, and when you have size and you can do it at a fast pace, he can stick handle in a phone booth. I mean, this guy can do anything. So people have fallen in love with him, rightly so.
Yeah.
But for me, you look at the success of the Edmonton Oilers, it's just not there. And it's to the point where his entry-level deal is over. He's been there now a handful of years. By this point in Sid's career, he was not only having individual success, but he was helping his team to the playoffs.
Right.
And they're in the playoffs every single season since he's been there. And they've now won 3 Stanley Cups with Sidney Crosby. So until Connor does that, for me, Sid's still the guy. Now, that's not me saying that that's the only reason. Sid, to me, is the better team guy. He makes everyone around him better. He works harder than everybody on the team, probably anybody in the league. He's one of those first guys on the ice, the last guy off the ice. When he sees something in his game that doesn't meet his standards or isn't up to snuff around the league with some of his peers, he works on it. You can look at his face-off prowess a few years ago. It was a facet of his game that just wasn't where it should be. Well, he worked all summer on face-offs just so he could become a better face-off guy. Now he's among the best in the league at doing that. He has had seasons where he scored 40 goals. He's had seasons where he's not scored 40, and he's been more of a setup man or maybe more focused on defense, doing whatever the team needed. So for me, when you look at the complete package, because generally he's not the biggest guy. I mean, he's not even 6 foot tall. Sidney Crosby, I think, is 5'11". His lower body is like a horse, though. So, I mean, this guy is strong. He can do whatever you need him to do. You can't knock him off the puck. He's tenacious. He goes hard to the net, sometimes to his own detriment. And I think he got away from doing that a little bit after his head injuries. But he's sort of back to playing in and around the goal again. I think he's feeling comfortable with himself. And for me, you can't sleep on Sidney Crosby. I still believe he is the best player in the league. A lot of his peers still feel that way. Connor will get all the shock and awe and the flash and bang and all this points. But Sidney Crosby, for my money, at least for the next couple of years, till I see something different, is going to get my vote. And I even last year, I got to tell you this, Charlie, I had a chance probably 5 times I voted for league awards as a member of the PHWA in Pittsburgh, and Sidney Crosby, even as far as last year, still got an MVP vote for me.
That's amazing. And I think that one thing you said is I think that the team success is the reason that I think we were finally able to. I mean, nobody really realistically, I think, talks about the Crosby-Ovechkin debate anymore. I don't really think it's a debate, and I think that's because of the success that Crosby's been able to have as a teammate and as a member of the Penguins. And I mean, Ovechkin finally got his cup, and I think when it happened last year, it was kind of like, good, now shut up. There's your cup, now shut up, and you know. But I think that's. I mean, I've always, and again, you have to take it with a grain of salt because of course we're hometown guys, but it's still. I've always felt that Crosby was the better player. But I think that the success he's had, bringing cups, actually winning in the playoffs, is what I think sort of is why you don't really hear that debate anymore. And am I wrong? I mean, is that you think that debate's pretty much at this point, unless you're actually in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, they try to keep that alive, of course. And last year, even after they won and they finally got over the Penguins hump, which they've only done twice ever,
right?
They needed to put out stories and do all these things that still tried to say, it's our time now, Penguins. We finally got past you, Penguins. And that was, I think, the biggest problem with them was they always just wanted to beat the Penguins.
Right.
You can't focus on beating one team. You've got to focus on winning Stanley Cups. To the Penguins, the Caps are just another bump in the road.
Right.
And they almost always get over it.
Right.
And they did it, 2 years ago, whenever the Caps should have rightly so beaten them. I mean, they had a lead in the series. The Penguins reel off a couple of wins. When they won Game 6 in Pittsburgh 2 years ago, before the Penguins went into Washington and took Game 7, there were people, ushers and things that we know, saying you could hear the party coming out of the visiting locker room because they thought they had that series wrapped up.
Yeah.
And then Marc-Andre Fleury shuts them out.
Right.
They get it was, I believe, a 2-0 win in Game 7. It was awesome. But anyways, the Alex Ovechkin Sid thing is always going to be there to a certain extent because of the time they came into the league at the same season, et cetera, et cetera. Even though Ovi's a little older, he should have been in the league the year before, if not for that lockout. Right. But his individual success is always going to be his thing. He was the best goal scorer of his generation. He still is. He's unbelievable. But Sid's team success, along with the individual accolades, I mean, to me, there's just no debate. I mean, Sidney Crosby, Alex is the best goal scorer probably, but Sid is the best player in that conversation. And I know we didn't get to use them all in the issue, but some of the numbers that we had pulled that we thought about using, you can see Sid's numbers, how they stack up.
Right.
I mean, since he came into the league, he has far more points than Ovi. He's played far less games. Right. And that alone tells you what's up because he's not only individual talent, it is the team success. They've won those cups, and they've beaten Washington along the way in each of those 3 Stanley Cup runs.
Right,
so
exactly.
That alone hammers it for me.
Right. One more thing on Crosby, and then we'll move on to more go deeper into the preview. Sure. Do you ever worry at all of? I mean, Sid has had some significant injuries.
Oh yeah.
The head injuries being, I think, the most recent, but he's had some pretty serious injuries. Do you think that that's going to end up potentially at some point taking its toll on him as far as maybe shortening his career or making him obviously head injuries, especially once you've had one or two. I mean, it's you're really at a risk to have a repeat injury on that. What do you think about Sid's injury and the kind of effect that they're going to have on this season, but also the remainder of his career?
If you'd asked me this question probably right before they won those 2 Stanley Cups, I would have said, well, boy, I'm not going to be shocked if Sid suddenly ups and retires one of these days, because I feel like he was worried about the future a little bit. Sure. And the concussion things just kept popping up. I mean, when he lost essentially 2 years of his career because of it, that was a very scary time for Penguins fans, for him, his family, I'm sure. But he seems to have gotten past it now, and I think because they took the time to get it healed correctly.
Right.
They also found the neck issue that he was dealing with, and they worked that out. There was a soft tissue issue that he had and all these things, and he used some chiropractic. He used all the concussion specialists. I mean, they did vestibular therapy, all these things to essentially rebuild that aspect of him.
Right.
And it's amazing what they can do. And not any two of these injuries are ever the same, you know what I mean? So they had to specialize it to Sid. He came through it, and you look at him now, he doesn't seem to have any ill effects of it. And, I mean, overall, when you see these kinds of injuries in the National Hockey League, it's a scary thing.
Right.
And their management and the leadership of the league still doesn't acknowledge that their game contributes to head injuries, which is kind of sickening. And that's something I think will eventually happen.
Yeah.
But when your face of your league was dealing with a very high-profile concussion situation caused by your game, you would think they would have embraced it more then, and they didn't. So I'm not shocked that they're not embracing it now and trying to say that, yes, we're causing problems for a lot of these guys. But for Sid, I don't know that his career is going to be shortened at to any extent now because of it, because he seems like they healed him the right way, and he seems like he's back to 100%. He may not be what he was before those injuries in terms of his game, but he's still very close to it, and he's still dynamic. And I feel like he's one of those guys that with the way he takes care of himself and takes care of his body, I doubt there's fries in Sidney Crosby's diet or anything like that. He's one of those guys, you know, it's like, no. I mean, they used to joke that Mario, you could tell when the season was coming because he would not order fries with his club sandwich or he would switch to veggie lasagna. But for Sid, I don't know that he has any of that kind of stuff. I mean, this guy's probably like eating sprouts on like a, I don't even know right now, but
sprouts on lettuce.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, lettuce wrap with sprouts.
Lettuce wrap with sprouts.
But he takes such great care of himself that he could probably play into his 40s. I mean, he's just that kind of guy. So I think Sid's going to definitely finish his contract, which now carries him into the 20s, the 2020s, which is kind of crazy when you think. I mean, he's been here now already 13 years. This is, I believe, his 13th season, and that's just wild to put your head around. And I wouldn't be shocked to see him play 20 years in the league.
Absolutely. So what are you seeing? This is the Pittsburgh Current podcast, by the way, and we are talking with Brian Metzer, Pittsburgh Current hockey writer, as well as a host on the Penguins radio network. You can pick up your new copy of the Pittsburgh Current this week. It is our Penguins preview.
Got it?
Yeah, I always miss that camera a little bit.
I hold it up to the other screen like a fool. That's what I was doing. And then it's like...
TVs have
we have
cameras
our
in them.
screen, and then we have our other screen,
Everybody see this? Follow us on the socials at Pittsburgh, at PGH Current. Sorg's looking at me. I know we had a mistake last week, folks, but when you've been somewhere for 15 years, it's tough to get that out of the brain, that's for sure.
Did you say the other one?
I did, and luckily, my man, somebody heard it at the office. We didn't notice it here in the room. At least we didn't know. I didn't notice it in the room, I'll say that.
Oh.
And then we got back, and we called down. It's like, can you fix that? And so Sorg was awesome enough to pull that down, fix it, and put it back up.
But it went out live, though.
Oh, it went out live, yeah. Yeah, we'll do it live.
You mind if I drop my Twitter handle?
Please do, Brian.
It's at Brian, BRIAN, _Metzer, METZER. So please check me out for not only hockey coverage, Black Metal Cats.
Yes, and I was gonna if we had time at the end, I was gonna talk a little music with Brian.
That's fine. Yeah, we can get that. I just always like to drop the Black Metal Cats because they're my favorite. They're these awesome, just like evil looking cat photos. They're just like walking on like a wintry scene, and then it has some like awesome sayings such as like, "I'm going to crush humanity," but it's a cool cat picture.
That's great. That's great. I'm more of a cat acting like humans type of a guy.
Oh, I love personified animal, Charlie. You got me. You
personified. I never knew that was. But I swear to God, if there was a picture of a cat sitting like a human, I'd be gone. I'd be done.
Any animal sitting like a human for me.
Or
I guess just have to be cats?
For me, it's cats,
Okay.
and I don't know why. Because I think because cats always thinking something, and I see them pondering. I think, and so
well, they are like such an intelligent animal.
Exactly.
They probably could kill us all in our sleep.
They actually could be running this podcast if I'm being completely honest.
Matter of fact, we might just be human skin that cats are wearing, and they are doing this podcast.
That may be. I'm actually 300 cats in a Charlie suit. Let's talk hockey, Brian Metzer.
Let's do it.
So what are you seeing as the preseason is underway?
It's almost over already.
Yeah,
believe
right.
It or not.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really a quick. Like I feel like the season lasts for 300 straight months, but the preseason really drags by. Really flies by.
It went fast this year.
What are you seeing early on that makes you heartened for the Penguins' success this season?
First off, and I talked with Phil Bork about this on our broadcast last night. The depth.
Yeah,
it is a team that last season when they came into the season, they didn't have a third-line center or a fourth-line center for that matter. I mean, you were just looking at them because they had lost Matt Cullen, they lost Nick Bonino, they essentially lost Chris Kunitz too, who was a valuable member of the bottom six. So guys just were gone. Trevor Daley was gone. They ended up losing Ian Cole mid-season. But right now when you look at them, they come in, they have 6 centers on their roster, so Jim Rutherford wasn't going to let that happen again like he did last year. So you have Sid and Gino down the middle, up top on the top 2 lines. You have Derek Brassard here now, who he acquired at the trade deadline, and he's going to be their third-line center probably. They were going to experiment with him on the left wing, but that hasn't happened as of yet. I don't know if we will end up seeing it at some point. We probably will. But he's there on the third line. And then Riley Sheahan, who they acquired early last season, he slotted in last night on the fourth line with Matt Cullen, who's back on his left wing. And on the right, they tried Daniel Sprong, but they have a guy named Derek Grant, who they acquired as a free agent this year. He scored 12 goals for the Anaheim Ducks last year. And Borky and I were discussing this. I think he can end up playing on the right wing of that fourth line. So suddenly, you went from having a fourth line last year to start the season that couldn't chip in offensively.
Right.
They weren't very good defensively. They didn't do a whole lot well. You had, I believe it was Greg McKegg, I think is his name. But it was McKegg for sure is his last name. I might be messing up his first name now. And this tells you how nondescript the fourth line was. And I feel bad because he was a try-hard guy. Mm-hmm. He played in Wilkes-Barre Scranton after the early stages of the season. But he was not an NHL caliber all the time, full-time fourth-line center. Now they have that. They have multiple options because if Sheahan for some reason will get hurt or someone else gets hurt, he can slide up and play third line. Matt Cullen can slide to the middle. Derek Grant can play center. He can play the wing. And you have guys on that fourth line all capable of taking faceoffs, all capable of scoring some goals. Matt Cullen scored, he has 2 goals in the preseason now. I believe it was his 4th point he picked up last night. So we know what he brings to the table, even though I always look at it this way. Hockey players always all used to be younger than all of us. All the pro athletes, they were all older than us. Now we're all older than the players, except for Matt Cullen, because he could be like, that's why they call him dad and all this, which I hate. I know I give that a lot of crap online, but Matt Cullen, I mean, he's post 40,
right?
And he's still out there. He's in fine shape. I mean, this guy's like a finely tuned machine, and I think that gives them another dynamic, just having him back with those other 2 guys I just mentioned.
Why does that bother you so much? The dad nickname.
Well, because first of all, I am older than Matt Cullen, by the way, and I refuse to call anybody who's younger than me dad. First of all,
well, you certainly shouldn't call him dad. I think that doesn't make sense.
It's fine if they want to do it. And
Some
of my colleagues in the Pittsburgh media took it a little far.
Got you.
And they would be doing radio hits and their dad this and dad that and dad's back and let's hug dad. And boy, the smiles in the room were huge when dad walked in. It just drives me crazy. Stupid things like that drive me crazy. And I don't know why. And people would say, Metz, you've lost your fandom. Well, yeah, probably.
You have to. I mean, even when you have it, like, even as big a fan as you are, and especially as you were, I mean, when we're covering sports, you have to drop that. I mean, it's not a request.
There's no cheering in the press box.
There's no cheering in the press box. That should be the shirt you're wearing. There's no cheering in the press box. And it's true. I mean, and it's It's a thing where you definitely have to, and it's one of the hardest things is to try and separate yourself, the fan, from the journalist, and it's tough to do. But I see what you're saying. It's sort of a thing for his teammates to call him. It's a sort of thing for the fans, but it's definitely weird to like. It's not like you're talking to John Wayner and you're calling him Rock. Hey, Rock, with this Rock.
Yeah.
It's Dad. It's a little strange.
Yeah, my dad died in 07. You know?
Yeah. Right.
So I can't do it. And people beat me up about it, but I beat them up about it. And I feel bad because some of my media cronies, I've taken shots at them for it, and then they get mad at me, and then we work it out. But
it all happens.
Figure if our biggest fight happens over the fact that I don't like you calling a guy Dad, I think we're doing just fine.
Exactly. The depth
When I left out the blue line depth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Because that was the other thing. You have now probably 8 defensemen capable of playing in the National Hockey League, because you have your top 6. I mean, Jack Johnson was signed; he'll be here now. But they have this kid, Juuso Ricola, who has played every preseason game. He came out of the Finnish Elite League. He chose the Penguins, and I think because he and not like they could even make a promise. They had the slots filled, but he felt like there was a path to the NHL here, and he looks the part. I mean, every single thing he does, he moves the puck well. He's not the biggest guy, but he uses his size well. He looks like an NHL caliber defenseman. He's got a big booming slap shot from the point. He scored a goal with it early in the preseason. You still have Chad Ruido available.
Yeah.
You still have a couple other guys down in Wilkes who came up and played some spot duty last year. So when you look at your top 6 and you got Ricola and Ruido available, they may have to make a decision, because Chad Ruido's on a one-way deal. He's not going to make through waivers. You don't want to also pay him to play in the minor leagues.
Right.
So you're going to have 2 guys sitting. I don't know what they're going to do, but right now the top 6 looks pretty solid with NHL one-way contract guys. So, I mean, Mike Sullivan, if nothing else, has options in the forward ranks with the guys we mentioned, and options on the blue line with some of those extras available to him.
Is last year in the playoffs, is it depth that you think sort of cost the Penguins down the line? Is that what you think? And particularly, I would think blue line depth obviously has been an issue in the past, certainly too. Yeah,
I think depth was a huge reason. I mean, because just the names we mentioned quickly in passing. I mean, you lost Chris Kunitz, you lost Trevor Daley, you lost Nick Bonino, you lost Matt Cullen. Those were guys that were all pretty valuable contributors to your Stanley Cup runs the 2 prior years. And then you ended up trading Ian Cole. Yes, they brought in Jamie Alexiak, but at the same time, the blue line wasn't quite where it was. And I know people would say, hey, they won without Chris Letang the year before, but the depth guys were there. You still had guys like Trevor Daley, and you still had guys like Ian Cole on the team that could shoulder bigger minutes potentially for you. So you got into a situation last year where it almost looked like the Penguins of maybe the 2012 season, the 2013 season, where I know they ended up acquiring some guys, but they got to be awfully top-heavy in terms of scoring. And that's what it was. Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin had to carry a big load. Phil Kessel had to carry a big load. Jake Gensel did as well. But when you shut down those top 2 lines, they weren't getting any productivity from the 3rd and 4th line in the playoffs specifically. Yeah. And without secondary scoring in the playoffs, you just weren't as formidable an opponent. And also, with the blue line not being where it needed to be, Matt Murray faced far more grade A opportunities. I mean, this guy was dealing with odd man breaks like crazy, dealing with breakaways. Look at the way they lost the game in overtime against the Washington Capitals. It was a turnover in the neutral zone. Evgeny Kuznetsov comes in on a breakaway. And yes, you still wish Matt Murray could have made that save, but it was a grade A chance in overtime, transition play. Penguins were burned by it from probably... the first time I really recalled it becoming a big issue was in a Rangers game, probably 3/4 of the way through the season. They had these speedy forwards that just decimated the Penguins in the neutral zone. Chip plays, catching their defensemen flat-footed and going on odd man breaks, and they end up scoring like 6 goals against the Penguins in the game. And I think that gave a blueprint to a lot of teams, and that's how the Penguins were eliminated, because Washington did it to them like crazy. That's how they came back in games when they were down. That's how they ultimately end up winning that series.
Before we talk about Matt Murray, which we will talk about in a moment, how set are these lines at this point, or where do you think the lines that we're seeing now? I mean, how set are these lines going into the season? How many changes do you see? Any major changes coming as they see?
You know what? I don't know that we're going to see a ton of major changes based on what we saw last night, because that came together pretty good. And that's the only note I brought, because I wanted to make sure I had these because it's all up here. But I wanted the line combos. And so what they did last night, and this was probably as close to an NHL lineup as they've iced in the preseason, it was Jake Gensel, Sidney Crosby, and Patrick Hornquist back on the right wing, which I love him there, but for whatever reason, it doesn't ever stick. Mike Sullivan moves him, and some people will say he and Sid don't always want to play together, or Sid doesn't want to play with him for some reason. That works like magic, though. Yeah. They always score, so they were back together last night. And I believe we talked about this in the preview about these guys being possibly interchangeable on the Gino line, but they had Carl Hagelin on the left wing with Gino and Phil Kessel last night, which Haggy brings a little bit of defensive prowess. He brings a little bit of speed. He can get pucks freed up for those two guys. Phil scored 2 goals last night on the line with him. The intriguing line, though, was the third one with Derek Brassard, Dominic Simone, and Brian Rust. And Rusty is the guy that is just like a chameleon. He can blend in anywhere in your lineup, so expect to see him moving up and down. But I like that look last night. It was a pretty good line. And then the fourth line is the one we talked about a moment ago, Cullen Sheahan and Daniel Sprong. I don't know that Daniel Sprong is the guy that's going to stick there because first of all, he started the season or the preseason with Sidney Crosby. Mm-hmm. Played there exclusively through the scrimmages, first couple preseason games. And I don't know that he's done enough with that. I mean, he's not looked out of place by any means, but he's not really been eye-catching. I mean, you want this guy's a dynamic offensive player. You want him to go out there. You're playing with Sidney Crosby. We just talked about what Sid brings. Yeah. You should be able to produce. He didn't score with him. And I just think Derek Grant's sitting there waiting in the wings to take Sprong's spot on that fourth line. I know Mike Sullivan elevated him late last night and tried to get a little more offense going with that top line. He put him back with Sid. It still didn't really jive for me. So I think Sprong could potentially find himself as the odd man out again here. Not guaranteed. I know they made a promise he'd be in the league this year, but right now I think your fourth line and your lineup as a whole might be better with Grant sliding in. But I think those lines that we just went through will probably be pretty close to what we'll see whenever the puck drops on the season next Thursday.
Great. We are talking to Brain Metzer. That's Metzger. Sorry, Metzger. We are talking to Brian Metzer, the host of Penguins Radio Network and the new hockey writer for the Pittsburgh Current, and we're very excited to have him on board. We have our Pens preview
find it
in boxes in our retail outlets, and you can of course find it online at pittsburghcurrent.com. You can find us on social media at PGH Current. It's going to happen again, I think. And
do it, Charlie.
Follow Brian on social.
Yeah, it's. I was looking. My phone was blowing up. I had to see what was happening here. People wanted to get in.
This is a very popular podcast.
But it's at Brian_Metzer is where you can find me. I'm on Facebook as well and Instagram and all that stuff.
I think we have upwards of 7 to 8 people at any given moment. I'm very excited.
I don't know. Maybe can we break double digits today?
Let's see. Let's get 11. We're looking for 11. I feel like it's a telethon now. Let's get 11. Let's talk about Matt Murray, and then we'll talk about some bold predictions that you made on the way out. But so Matt Murray obviously is another. I don't know. I see him as a question mark coming into the season. Maybe some don't, but I mean, there was. Basically, future of the Pens was put on his shoulders last year when they decided when they chose him over Fleury, and it wasn't what I would call a great season for Matt Murray. But how do you assess his season last year, and how do you see what kind of year do you see him having now?
Well, for me, Matt Murray last year, I felt bad for him because we came into the season and everybody anticipated this huge showing for him because, I mean, he probably, I guess the best way to describe it was he was the closest thing that we thought we were going to have in Pittsburgh to a guy that would contend for a Vezina trophy because he seemed like he could have the sub-2 goals against. He seemed like he could have the .950 save percentage or the .930 save percentage, all this kind of thing. Well, last year, when you stir in the defensive woes we just talked about, I think that affected him more than anything because he had to deal with more shots. He had to deal with more quality shots because there'd be games where the Penguins only give up 22 shots or something, but we could say 10 of them were like these odd man breaks where any goaltender would have suffered. And here's my hot take, and people may not like this. Penguins would have lost to the Washington Capitals last year with Marc-Andre Fleury in net because he would have dealt with the same thing.
Right.
And Mark was he was very much aided, I think, by the way Vegas plays hockey.
Right.
He had an outstanding season. I love the Flower. I'm not taking anything away from him because he did his part. But they made his life a little easier than the Penguins because the Penguins just play a different style. They are run and gun. They're on the go offensively, and they still did that when their defense wasn't there to cover up, and then the goalie just wasn't able to get the job done either. So Matt Murray had the worst stats of his career last year. He had his father pass away midseason. He had a concussion that really derailed his season right when he was starting to round into form.
Sure.
I felt like he was looking like himself,
Yeah.
and then this concussion happened, and that messed him up. So this year, and some of the quotes we used in a graphic you have in the physical copy of the Pittsburgh Current Hockey issue were very telling for me. He talked about watching tape of himself and not liking what he saw, and feeling like he had to work on his overall game and become just a more well-rounded goaltender overall. He worked on his conditioning. He worked on the glove. I mean, he worked on all these things because people beat up his glove hand a lot. He does let up some goals there. He's not immune to that. He knows it happens. But I feel like he is a little bit of an odd bird, and that's a good thing. He doesn't let these things get to him. He just wants to face the next shot after every goal he lets up. It doesn't matter if it's a bad goal or whatever. He bounces right back. He's ready for action. I think this year he's going to come in. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He looked pretty darn good in net last night. Now, the last preseason game he played, he did a couple out of character things because he's a big kid. He's if I stand next to him, I'm like maybe at his shoulder. And I'm 5'8", 9 on a good day. He's a really tall guy, covers a lot of net. I know he's a string bean, but with his equipment on, he can eat up a lot of net. Well, we were noticing this 2 games ago. He was getting sort of low and giving the top of the net away. And I don't know if he's trying to work on something in his game.
Right.
And that hurt him. Someone scored a goal against him. It was Oliver Bjorkstrand of the Columbus Blue Jackets scored a goal. Everyone thought he roofed it in the net. In the meantime, he didn't. He really just put it low on Matt Murray, and he should have been able to get it because he's so big, and he was just so low that he wasn't taking away the middle of the net. He didn't do that last night.
Right.
So I think he was just working on something maybe, and because what they do to these goaltenders, and they did this to Marc-Andre Fleury a few years ago when Mike Bales was here, and he's not with the team anymore, but they got Fleury to play a little lower because he used to stand upright and use his athleticism and dive around and do all this crap. Well, Mark, they wanted him to get down in more of like a crab-like pose in the net because you can sort of see through legs and see through traffic a little bit more, and that worked for him. He didn't have to be as athletic. He would if he needed to, but he was able to play the angles better that way. You could read and react better. You could follow plays better, and I wonder if they're doing something similar with Matt Murray a little bit, telling him to get a little lower in his net and try and look through traffic, but you can't overcompensate to do that. You don't want to take away the things you do well. But I think he's in store for I keep kicking my mic. I think he's in store for a pretty good bounce back season. He has a good head on his shoulders. He's ready for action, and I'm excited to see that.
Do you think that Murray's always going to have sort of these? I think he will always have these comparisons to Marc-Andre Fleury. How fair do you think that is? I mean, Fleury was not immune to criticism. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, fans were always quick
merciless.
to...
They loved him when he was gone.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
He had I mean, people love Marc-Andre Fleury.
Sure.
Who doesn't? I mean, he's still one of my favorite players I've ever covered. He was easy to root for. He was just a human. It's such a good guy. Yeah. I often like to say that my cousin developed a relationship with him because he works for a car dealership in the city, and he remembered his kid's birthday.
Wow.
And sent him gifts and things.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
he's that kind of guy. And but Marc-Andre Fleury, before his career's over, he very well could be a Hall of Fame goaltender.
Yeah.
He's going to finish in the top 5 in wins. His other numbers might not be as eye-popping, but he's going to have 3 Stanley Cups on his roster, on his resume. He may end up with another one with Vegas. So they look pretty darn good. And it was hard to have him go. I mean, it was a business decision. Penguins had to do it just based on the contracts. If you want to have the type of team that they have built where you're just paying up to the ceiling of the salary cap every year, and you knew Matt Murray was here, it was a decision you had to make.
Sure.
And with the expansion draft looming, Matt Murray would have been taken. And you can't give up a 22-year-old kid in an expansion draft. You just cannot, specifically one that won 2 cups for you.
Right.
So that's, for me, the bottom line was, as hard as that was, it was a decision they had to make. People really, after the fact, when you stir in Murray's sort of dip, they didn't want to see the flower go, so they were like, yeah, he stinks, and they should have kept Mark. And if there was no salary cap, for sure, that's what you needed to do. But you had a salary cap, and you had to make a very tough business decision, and I'm glad Mark found some success. But he was not loved by any means during his tenure in the Penguins net. People were merciless, specifically people around the league. I still have fights with my good buddy Boomer Gordon on SiriusXM because He brings up Fleury, and he still says the Penguins would have won more Stanley Cups if not for Marc-Andre Fleury. He even though Mark only had 2 bad playoff runs in my view, he was really good all the other ones. Because I feel like years after the debacle against the Flyers in 12 and a couple other dips, he was the Penguins' best player against the Rangers when they got eliminated the next season, and just he was one of the best things they had going. That 13 year, he was not his best either. That's when Vaucoon had to come in for him, but generally, I've always been impressed by his ability to help this team win games, and he'll always have that. And he's, it's a shame he didn't maybe contribute more to those cup runs in terms of winning the actual final game.
Right,
but he still was a big part of the success.
And I kind of like where he is in Vegas for him personally because here he was always sharing the limelight with Sid and Gino. There, I was in Vegas last year around right before Christmas, and that's Fleury City out there. I mean, it is just there are banners everywhere. They're selling his merch everywhere. I mean, he is the man in Vegas, and it's really cool.
He's an ambassador
cool
for them.
He is, and it's to have a player like that on the first year of your expansion team, and then of course go to the finals. Obviously, you're setting.
Can you
yourself
imagine that play? I mean, that was just probably so awesome.
Yeah,
to be a fan of that. I mean, you're just trying to maybe some people trying to learn the game. I know there's a lot of transplants, but to have this kid come in. I mean, the day after the expansion draft, he was already in Vegas playing street hockey with kids and like selling the game.
Yeah,
that's awesome. He's just that speaks to the guy he is.
Let's talk 2 things. Let's talk predictions. Let's talk real predictions, and then let's talk bold predictions.
Okay.
What realistically do you what kind of finish do you see this team, or what kind of success do you see this team having this year?
They got to stay healthy.
Yeah,
that's the biggest key for me, and you need a bounce back from Chris Letang and Matt Murray. If you get that, and everybody else does what they're capable of doing, and it doesn't even have to be a bold prediction like I know I made a couple in here. If they just go out and be themselves, and Sid and Gino combined for close to 200 points, where maybe they're putting up 80, 90 points apiece, you're going to have this team be a formidable foe in the Eastern Conference. I feel like a lot of teams in the East might have stayed the same and or took a little bit of a step back. It seems to be wide open. In seasons when it's wide open, the Penguins tend to rise to the top of that. They just find ways. And I believe that they're a team that could make another run at the Stanley Cup this season, and losing last year the way they did might have benefited them more than anything, because they got to sort of lick wounds. They got to recharge the battery a little bit, and that was another thing Matt Murray talked about right when camp started. It wasn't so much fatigue for bodies, because he goes, our bodies can deal with anything. I mean, we're finely tuned athletes. We all work out hard. We can do tough workouts. They can handle it. It's the mental fatigue that comes with those playoff runs that they had, where you played over 300 hockey games in the last 3 seasons. I mean, that was crazy to think that they played that much hockey. And when you stir in the World Cup a couple years ago, and you stir in all of that, I think they're really they're healthy. They're primed to make another run at this, and I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, they'll definitely make the playoffs.
Yeah,
they already look like that kind of team, and if they can tighten up defensively and score the way they're capable, I mean, I don't know that there's a team that can beat them. And I said this last year, and Washington ended up doing it, but they always have that look still under Mike Sullivan as a team that can't be beat in a 7-game series.
Right.
How do you beat them 4 times in 7 games?
The exact same thing.
I just don't think it's possible. So they have these weapons, and now they have the secondary scoring back, hopefully. That makes them so much harder to play, because you can't just shut down Sid and Gino. You got to then focus on Brassard's line or Sheahan's line. I mean, you got guys that are gamers now on all 4 lines. I mean, it's a very deep hockey team that's capable of scoring a lot of points, and when you can score a lot of goals like that, you're going to be tough to beat.
Let's talk about your bold predictions. Take a couple of those, and let's back them up a little bit.
Okay.
So, what do you feel is, out of your bold predictions, what do you feel is the most bold prediction? One that you think is most likely to come true, and one that you think would really take some work.
For me, the one that's probably going to be toughest to come true is them having 3 100-point scorers.
Right. I was going to bring that up.
But I mean, it's they have guys capable of it for sure. I wouldn't be shocked if Sid and Gino could get to that plateau, getting Phil into it as well, because I believe I start off with saying Phil's going to be a 100-point scorer. Sid's going to be an Art Ross winner this year, and then Gino will be the third 100-point scorer. And I do think it's not out of the realm of possibility, but generally speaking, that's probably the toughest to have happen, just because goal scoring is down. It spiked a little bit again last year, and it looks like in the preseason a lot of goals are being scored. Yeah. So if you have games where they're putting up 5 and 6 goals, 100 points is not out of the question. So, but I do think that's the one that's toughest to become a reality. The power play one is one that I wouldn't be shocked to see them achieve. They did it last year. They set the new franchise record.
Sure.
And they have all the same weapons plus, because you have Chris Letang's going to be healthy and be there. Justin Schultz is a very capable power play performer, and you now have Jack Johnson, who's capable of playing on the power play, and he's got a booming slapper. He's going to put that shot on net. That's going to create a bunch of rebounds. That's going to create opportunities for Jake Gensel around the net, Sidney Crosby around the net. Sid might start doing that little tip move right at the goal mouth again. He hasn't done that in a few years, where he was just chipping pucks in like that. So the power play could very feasibly hit 26.3% to set a new franchise mark again. So I think that's a realistic one. And the 100 points is probably tough.
Very good. Brian Metzer. We've been talking hockey with Brian Metzer of the Penguins Radio Network and the every time I say the new, I want to say, and the new hockey writer, Pens writer for the
ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls,
children of all ages.
We do this every week.
Hey, we're here. Come on over. Penguins preview, Pittsburgh Current Penguins preview on stands now. Find it at your retail outlets or online at pittsburghcurrent.com. Also, follow us on our socials at PGH Current. And Brian Metzer, thank you very much for coming in. And you want to plug? Oh, look for Brian's coverage on pittsburghcurrent.com as the season progresses, and we'll also see him in the print issue as well. So we're looking forward to getting a lot more from you this season, a lot more of your insights and analysis.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me today. Thanks for inviting me on board with your publication. That's been a blast so far. I love the issue. It came together really well. If you haven't found it yet, please do. Look it up currently at on the site, right?
Yeah, pittsburghcurrent.com. Go to currently at, and you can see an interactive
where the
map
boxes are and everything like that.
Where boxes are our retail outlets. And, yeah, we'll see you next week on the Pittsburgh Current podcast. Charlie Deitch, editor and publisher. Meow.